Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to another episode of Thinking It Through with Nate. I am your host, Nate. Quick reminder that I am on Supercast, so you can go down and get that link in the description below. So there's two different plans. You can either get a paid version, which is $5 a month, or you can do $100 up front, which is a one-time payment, and you get all of my content forever, all bonus content that I'll produce in the future. With a $5 a month subscription, you'll also get all of that content, but it is monthly. Also, there is a free subscription if you just want to check out my regular videos or get the podcast link. You can do that as well. It also helps me just keep track of who's listening and know who's listening consistently. So if you are one of those consistent listeners, I really appreciate that. It's helping me do something that I want to do and continue to do in the future. Being able to get support for this is just really encouraging for me, so I do appreciate that. So let's go ahead and jump into the topic that I want to talk about today, which overall is going to be what the biggest fix that we need for society is. If you were to start from just like a beginner point, a root issues, like trying to understand what's wrong with society and why things are going wrong, what is like the one thing that we need to fix? So I'll get to that, and then I'll also talk about how that's led me to the reforms that I advocate for now and why I think those are so important as well. But I think we need to fix this first thing. So we'll get to that, and then I'll also just kind of go into a little bit of some thinking behind that, and where I tend to see people also kind of share this viewpoint, and then I want to try to push people from that viewpoint into what kind of action we can take to try to make that reality. So so the first thing that I just want to talk about is how when you start to analyze like the world and try to understand what's going wrong, what causes people to do things on an individual level that will be maybe harmful for somebody else, or people who are in positions of power who make decisions that benefit themselves or the people that are around them, their communities more than they do society at large, why that comes about, and what kind of thing needs to fix that. So if you start to analyze that and go all the way back, you start to understand like certain psychological things that are causing people to make decisions. And this is why I'm really interested in psychology, is because I do think that everything comes from an individual decision-making standpoint. Like everything that occurs has to have been first made a decision by an individual, and then the consequences kind of go out from there, whether or not they're intentional or unintentional consequences. So I think that starting with the individual is a really great place for trying to understand just what it is that's causing people to make decisions that don't help or benefit people. Now, I think it's also helpful to understand, before we get to the answer, to understand kind of why, what we're trying to get at. So I think it's also helpful to try to understand kind of what the goal is. And I kind of mentioned this in my last video about the idea of a transcendent ethic, but essentially what that means is just trying to move humanity and individuals as far away from suffering as possible. It's kind of just a scale, right? It's like the worst possible experience, and then you can imagine whatever a really good, or I don't know if the best possible experience exists, but getting away from suffering and moving towards a better life is kind of what we're aiming for. And so once you kind of understand that the idea is that we're trying to reduce suffering, then it becomes kind of clear to me what the problem is when it's any decision that is causing suffering, whether it be individual suffering for the individual who's making that decision, or whether it be suffering for anyone else outside of them, whether that be individual like humans or even other species. We humans cause suffering for other species as well, so that's something to consider when you're thinking about this. And I think that, so this all being said, I think it starts to become pretty clear what the issue is, right? And so I think that the issue boils down to greed. I think it comes down to the individual decision to prioritize your wants over even your own or others' needs, which I think is what produces suffering. So when people make greedy decisions, they're ignoring the well-being of other people that could be affected, as well as their own well-being that can be affected. And so I think that a lot of people, especially like in the community that I kind of emerged from, I don't want to call it like the hippie community, because it's a little bit different than that. It's kind of like this like a mix between like the idea of spirituality and like an energy sense, which is like where I would say the hippie part comes from, but also just like wanting to like build cohesive communities and like have local control and all of those kind of things. I think that's like a general kind of idea from a lot of the community that I kind of am part of and emerged from socially and all this kind of stuff. So I think that this is also something that's really important for people in this community here, is that a lot of us at least, have identified greed as the problem, and that we need to get rid of greed, and that's what's causing people to make all of these decisions constantly. So if there just wasn't greed, people would start making better decisions that would help everybody, and we could, make the world more cohesive, and we could, work together collectively easier and stuff like that, which I think is ultimately the dream. And that's not to say like communism, which people might associate some of those words I just said with. I think we can have communities and local local control and stuff like that without having communism. So I just to stop that thought right there. So that being said, I think that a lot of us have identified greed as the issue. And so the question becomes like, well, if this is the solution, like we need to kind of get rid of greed, we need to, like, people need to go through this realization of that's the problem, and then it's also like personal process and awakening and realization of like, well, what can we do to move away from greedy behaviors for ourselves? What can we do to wake other people up to this issue and to help kind of other people, realize the problem and then also start to move away from these behaviors? And that's a great analysis of the problem. I do think that that's super essential. But I want to push this thought process one step further, because this has been my thought process for years and years and years now, is how do we do this? How do we get to the point where everyone's also where everyone's individually okay, but also everyone's individual actions are also not directly, or at least not intentionally, causing any kind of suffering outside of themselves? So how do we get to that point? And I think that one really important thing to realize is that to get into that kind of mindset where you're considering the betterment of the world, even considering the betterment of yourself to a certain degree, and especially considering the betterment of yourself to a degree of an ideal rather than just on a relative circumstance of your life kind of thing. To get into that mindset, there are certain basic things basic needs need to be met in your life. To me, you cannot progress to that point of considering those things, or at very least starting to act that out and wanting to do things that produce that situation in the world of reducing suffering. You cannot get to that point unless you have your necessities met. And so that kind of creates a weird catch-22, because part of the reason that we want to solve the problem of greed is because people don't have their necessities met. People are suffering, right? So we want to solve that by eliminating greed. But then we're in this loop where you can't eliminate greed until you solve that, right? So this is my thing, it is a really weird situation. It almost seems like a paradox, but I personally believe that there are ways to solve at least the basic necessities problem, at least for a large majority of humanity, without fully fixing the idea of greed. I think that is possible. People in charge and in power need to realize that greed is something that we need to be considering and not acting on for this to happen. But this doesn't have to be like a full societal-wide awakening to greed to fix this issue, nor does it need to be some kind of social movement of anti-greed, or that becoming like the number one value of the dominant part of society. It doesn't need to be like a mainstream thing yet to solve this issue. I think that we can solve basic necessities first, and then get to the point where everyone starts to consider bigger things, collective communities, dreams, moving on to new innovations and creations and stuff like that. All of that will emerge out of a community and society that has their basic needs met, that the suffering that remains is the normal suffering of day-to-day life, of general upkeep, of moment-to-moment experience, of nothing being permanent, and all those kind of things. That kind of suffering needs to be the only suffering that's left, because everything else is kind of distracting on the way to do that, because we are physical beings with bodies that have needs and survival instincts and drives and stuff like that. All of these things are going to just forever prevent us from being able to address the problems of greed without first having our basic needs met. So I think that's what we have to address. So we can't fix greed until people are no longer in a scarcity mindset, is the way that I want to put this. Andrew Yang had a great quote during his campaign that was about whether you're in an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset, and how that changes everything. And I think that's extremely true. Another great idea to bring this back to is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you've never heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'll put the image up here. But essentially what that is it's a ladder of needs that you need to climb to be able to reach the next consideration of need. So here, let me just pull it off so I'm reading it off correctly. Okay, so the bottom one is physiological needs, which are things like food, water, warmth, rest, basically anything that keeps your general body going, that keeps your body healthy, moving, basic stuff just to keep the body alive, right? After those have been met, and this is what Maslow's hierarchy says, is after those needs have been met, then the mind turns to the next set, which is safety needs: security, safety, shelter, being in a safe environment, making sure there's not any like threats looming around, not having a fear for your safety, like those kind of things, right? So then you can start to consider those after you have your basic physical needs met. After these needs are met, and again, like if any one of these drops off, you're back to the set where you lost it, right? So if you have safety, security, and warmth, but all of a sudden if you have like safety, security, shelter, and all of a sudden your food, water, warmth, the rest needs evaporate, your mind's going to turn right back to that bottom of the pyramid until those are met, and then you can climb again. So the next one after safety needs is belongingness and love needs: intimate relationships, friends, community, having a place that you belong, people that you belong with, engaging interaction, stuff like that is really is the next thing up that we start to consider after we've had our physiological needs met and our safety needs met. The next one is esteem needs, which is prestige, feeling of accomplishment. Basically that's moving up in the social hierarchy, feeling like you're contributing something, feeling like you're valued, people appreciate you, like you've contributed something to society. That's esteem needs. Even like social things, right? Contributing to the social environment where you feel like you're appreciated. Maybe people laugh at your jokes constantly or whatever. Like those kind of things are the esteem needs. The very last one at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, achieving one's full potential, and this also includes creative activities. So this is where we're trying to get everybody, is to this point of self-actualization. We're all the most effective individuals to produce a great life and a great society for everyone. Some people have argued that there could be another tier on top of self-actualization, which is like spiritual needs, connecting with everything, realizing that all is one, realizing the compassion that you can have for all beings, stuff like that might be on top of that. But either way, this to me kind of argues that point again, that like we can't start considering what we need to do society-wide, what we can offer best for society, all of this until our basic needs are met. So we have to fix that first. And I think, there's policies that I've discussed and that I will continue to discuss. I don't think I'm going to mention anything here, but I think that those kind of things, there's certain policies that we can do to fix the government and fix economic situations that will fix the problem of basic needs and then open up the door for us to further address the problem of greed and get to the bottom of that and really start to address that, which I think will take at least self-actualization on the individual basis, and then at possibly that next tier up of like spiritual realization, or at least spiritual pursuit. And in other words, spiritual just means connecting with yourself to even remove some of that day-to-day suffering more, and then also like again realizing like the compassion that you can have for all beings. Like to me, that's what spirituality is. So none of those things can be done until we address basic needs. And so I guess if there's one thing that I want to get across in this episode, it's that greed is the problem and that we've analyzed that correctly, but we need to take it one step further and realize that there's some things that we need to solve. We need to step outside of that loop, right? Of the, greed is fixing suffering and suffering can't be fixed until greed is fixed. We need to figure out that like, no, there is a way to like try to reduce the suffering a little bit outside of just completely getting rid of greed, that we can accomplish and then step on those further goals and really try to get to that point where, we're participating in a collective community where everyone has something to offer, and we're compassionate for everybody and stuff like that, and everyone's needs are met. So that's kind of the idea of what we're trying to get to. So yeah, so that's essentially everything that I wanted to say. We have to fix some things that have to do with the government. Again, this is the theme of my last few podcasts, but to do this, it has to be government-based. And then it has to be substantial, and it has to make a big difference and meet everyone's basic needs before we can start to expect to advance even further on this goal of fixing greed, because it really is the biggest issue. If you really analyze things on a basic psychological level, if you try to take out factors that are occurring outside of us and everything that cause someone to be the way they were, if you just understand what's happening, what's the trigger that causes people to make decisions that cause more suffering, it's greed. And if you can fix that, then you do fix suffering, or at least you fix any suffering that comes from intentional action or willing disregard for well-being, which I think could be included in intention. So so that's everything. Thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate you tuning in. I have been a little bit slow on the episodes over the past couple of weeks because I've had a lot to do with work, but hopefully that'll be slowing down a bit and I'll be able to get these up more. I also have asked a couple people to come on the podcast, so hopefully that will be also coming together soon. So there will be some good conversations on here, and you won't just have to listen to me talk all the time, but hopefully I'm providing good content on this regard as well. So anyway, thanks so much and have a great one. Thank you so much for watching Thinking It Through with Nate. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support my work, there are two things you can do. First, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit those like, subscribe, and bell icons for the algorithm. Then follow my link in the description to Supercast, where you can access the podcast link for your podcast provider and subscribe for $5 a month or pay $100 for all of my content forever. You can also subscribe for free to keep up on my regular content and help me keep track of how many people are listening. Thanks, and I'll see you for the next one.